The air on Orbis Station's commercial deck was always thick. It was not the air itself, which was a carefully balanced mix of gases, but the sensation it carried. 100 different species moved in a slow, noisy river under the artificial daylight strips. Scents of strange spices, engine coolant, and the faint, sterile smell of filtered oxygen mixed into something uniquely unpleasant. This was where the galaxy, for a price, rubbed shoulders. Gene liked to stand near the central atrium, his back to a support column. It was a habit from another life. Observe, do not be observed. He was a young man with a quiet face and calm eyes, dressed in simple station-made clothes. To most of the beings who flowed past him, he was part of the scenery. Just another human, one of the newer, softer species on the station. Fragile, breakable, an afterthought. His gaze, however, missed very little. He watched the six-limbed Gel traders arguing over crystal components. He noted the quick, skittering movements of the service drones. He saw the board security guard, a hulking Tauran, leaning against a wall, and he saw Mina. Mina was across the wide walkway inside the transparent wall of the atrium. It was a slice of Earth, a diplomatic project meant to show something peaceful about humanity. Inside, she tended to a sprawling bed of Terran moss. It was a vibrant green, a shocking color amid the station's metal and gray composites. The moss was not just for show. It processed carbon dioxide and produced oxygen with remarkable efficiency. Mina's job was to keep it alive. She was a small woman, with careful hands and a patient expression. She hummed as she worked, pruning and checking moisture levels. A tiny island of calm in the chaotic deck. Gene did not know her, but he recognized her. They were two of maybe 50 humans on this section of the station. A quiet nod in a corridor was their only exchange. He respected her work. It was useful, and it required a gentle, persistent kind of strength. The river of traffic suddenly broke. A bulk trader shoved his way through the crowd, his bulk causing smaller beings to stumble aside. Bulks came from a high-gravity world. They were tall, thick-bodied, with tough, pebbled skin the color of dried clay. This one's mood was as bad as his manners. He snarled at a Gel who was too slow to move, the sound a low rumble of grinding rocks. His path was taking him directly past the atrium's open archway. Mina, hearing the commotion, looked up from her moss bed. She saw the bulk heading straight for a delicate instrument panel she had left on the walkway's edge, a sensor for measuring atmospheric balance. It was station property, but she felt responsible for it. She stepped out, not in his path but to the side, holding up a hand. Her voice was clear but polite, cutting through the low din. "Excuse me. Please, could you step around? The equipment is fragile." The bulk stopped. He looked down at her, his small, deep-set eyes blinking slowly. He smelled of engine grease and something sour. He did not see a person doing a job. He saw an obstacle, a soft, pink-skinned obstacle from a low-gravity backwater. "This organic clutter is in the way," he grumbled, his voice translator converting his speech into flat, angry galactic common. He gestured a massive hand at her moss garden inside the atrium. "You Earthborn and your messy, growing things. Move your fragile self." "The panel," Mina said again, her voice steady, though Gene saw her fingers tighten on her pruning tool. "Just step to the left, please." The bulk's patience, thin to begin with, snapped. He did not shove her. He drew back his heavy, three-fingered hand and, with a casual, contemptuous force, backhanded her across the face. The sound was a sickening crack. Mina's head snapped to the side. Her feet left the ground. She flew backwards, crashing through the atrium archway and landing in a sprawl across her own beloved bed of Terran moss. The green cushion broke her fall, but she lay still for a heart-stopping second, a dark trickle of blood already appearing at the corner of her mouth. Her pruning tool clattered on the deck plating. A pocket of silence erupted in the noise of the deck. It spread out from the atrium like a shockwave. Conversations died. The Gel traders froze. The Tauran security guard straightened up, but he was too far away, and his movement was slow, unsure. Violence happened, but this was so sudden, so brutally one-sided that Jin's body went very still. The calm observation in his eyes vanished, replaced by a blank, cold clarity. He was not thinking about anger or justice or heroism. His mind, trained by years of disciplined practice, simply began to work, processed the scene with a terrible speed. The Brulk, satisfied, snorted. He looked at Mina's still form in the moss. "Breakable," he said to the crowd, as if proving a point. He turned to continue his path, his bulk moving away from the atrium. 20 seconds. That was the space between the strike and what happened next. For Jean, those 20 seconds were not empty. They were full of data. The Brulk's height, 2.5 meters. His weight, estimated 400 kilos. His stance, arrogant, off-balance, weight on his back leg. The weak points, the lateral hinge of the knee joint, the nerve cluster at the shoulder junction where the armor-like skin was thinnest, standard Brulk physiology, information every human on the station had been given in a basic briefing. The deck surface, slightly graded for traction. He did not run. He did not shout. He simply stepped away from his column and began to walk. His movements were smooth, direct, and utterly silent. The river of traffic seemed to part for him now, not out of fear, but out of a sudden, collective intake of breath. All eyes were on the Brulk, and on the small human man now moving toward him with a purpose that was both quiet and absolute. The countdown, unseen and unfelt by everyone but Jean, had begun. Inside Jin's mind, the world simplified. The noise of the deck, the staring faces, the smell of the station. All of it faded into a distant hum. There was only the target, the environment, and the objective. The objective was clear: neutralize the threat. It was a cold, technical term, but it fit the cold, technical process happening behind his eyes. His training had never been about fighting. His grandfather, a quiet man with strong hands, had called it the art of not fighting. It was about balance, about space, about using what the other person gave you. For years, in a small gym on Earth, Jean had learned how to fall, how to roll, how to redirect. He learned that the biggest person could be put on the ground if you understood the levers of their own body. It was a puzzle. The Brulk was just a very large, very angry puzzle. As he walked, his brain fed him information in quick, clean flashes. The Brulk's back was mostly turned, but he was starting to become aware of the unusual silence. He began to slow, his big head starting to rotate to look over his shoulder. Jean adjusted his angle of approach. He would not come from directly behind. That was blind and dangerous. He would come from the side, just within the edge of the Brulk's vision. Weight on the back right leg. The observation was calm, like noting the weather. The Brulk's right knee was locked. It was a pillar, not a spring. A pillar can be knocked out from under a structure. Primary weapon. The arms. Long reach. Power in the shoulders. The shoulders were a strength, but also a weakness. The joint there, where the massive arm met the torso, was a complex bundle of nerves and tendons. A precise strike there would not break the bone, but it would send a lightning bolt of confusion to the entire limb. It was a temporary fix, but it would create an opening. The briefing files on Brulks had been very clear. They were strong but not agile. Their nervous system, while different from a human's, had similar key points for motor control. They relied on intimidation and overwhelming force. They did not expect precision. They did not expect someone to get so close. Jean was now 10 meters away. The Brulk completed his turn, his small eyes finding Jean. He saw a human male, smaller than the female he had just struck. A flicker of annoyance crossed his broad face. This was becoming a nuisance. "What?" the Brulk growled, his translator flattening the word into a challenge. "You have a problem, little thing?" Jean did not answer. Answering was a waste of energy. It also gave the Brulk a moment to think, to prepare. Silence was better. Silence was unsettling. He kept walking, his pace unchanged. His eyes fixed not on the Brulk's face, but on the center of his chest. It was a trick. Watch the center, and you see the movement of all the limbs. 5 meters. The Brulk's annoyance turned to anger. This silent approach was an insult. He shifted his weight, settling into a wider stance. It was a classic show of dominance, making himself look bigger. To Jean, it was a gift. It meant the Brulk was planting himself. He was deciding to stand and fight, not to move. A moving target was harder. "I asked you a question," the Brulk roared, and this time he swung that it was a wide, powerful backhand, a mirror of the blow that had hit Mina. It was meant to swat Jean away, to send him flying into a wall to end this distraction. The force behind it was tremendous. If it connected, every bone in Jin's face would break. But Jean was already moving. He did not jump back. Jumping back only put you in range for the next swing. Instead, he stepped forward and to the inside of the swing. The massive arm passed through the air where his head had been, the wind of it ruffling Jin's hair. He was now inside the Brulk's reach, close enough to smell the sour scent on his skin. The Brulk was shocked. He had expected impact or retreat. He had not expected the target to disappear and then reappear right next to him. His brain, slow to process this, sent a frantic signal to bring his arm back, to grab this annoying insect. That was the moment Jean used. The Brulk was pulling his right arm back, his weight committed. His right side was exposed. Jin's left hand shot out, not as a fist, but with fingers stiff and precise. It struck not the hard plates of the Brulk's chest, but a specific spot just below the armpit, where the armor-like skin folded. It was a nerve cluster. The effect was instant and dramatic. The Brulk's right arm, which had been pulling back with great force, suddenly went loose and heavy. A grunt of shock and pain exploded from his mouth. His eyes widened in pure, uncomprehending surprise. His right side was now open, unbalanced, and confused. The clock in Jin's head ticked. About 12 seconds had passed. He had created the opening. Now he had to use it. The Brulk was starting to topple to his right, his support leg buckling from the sudden failure of his arm and the shift of his own weight. The puzzle was solving itself. All Jean had to do was help it along. The Brulk's bellow of shock was a physical sound, a deep vibration in the air. His right arm hung like a dead weight, a strange, tingling numbness replacing the powerful surge of his muscles. His mind, simple in its rage and confusion, could not understand what had happened. A touch, just a touch from this soft thing, and his strength was gone. Instinct took over. His left arm, still fully functional, swung in a wild, clumsy hook towards Jin's head. It was a panicked move, full of power but no control. Jean had already predicted it. He was still inside the Brulk's reach, in the safest place to be against a larger opponent, too close for their big swings to gain full force. Jean did not block the swinging left arm. Blocking that much mass would break his own bones. Instead, he moved with it. As the fist came across, Jean turned his body, letting the blow glance off his back. He used the motion, adding his own spin to it. In the same fluid movement, he stepped deeper, his hip now close to the Brulk's thigh. The Brulk was overcommitted. His wild left swing had pulled his upper body forward. His right side was weak and collapsing. His balance, which had seemed so solid a moment before, was now a teetering tower. Jin's hands were already in position. His right arm hooked under the Brulk's still numb right arm, gripping the thick fabric of the trader's tunic. His left hand pressed firmly against the Brulk's lower back. This was not about muscle. This was about physics. The Brulk felt a pull and a push at the same time. It was not a strong feeling, but it was perfectly placed. Jin's legs drove upward, his back straightened, and he became a lever. He did not try to lift the Brulk. He simply guided the falling weight. The Brulk's own forward momentum, his towering height, his sudden lack of support on his right side, all of it conspired against him. He felt the deck plate leave his feet. A dizzying sense of inversion washed over him. The world turned upside down. The bright daylight strips of the station ceiling filled his vision, then spun away as the hard, grated floor rushed up to meet him. The impact was tremendous. A heavy, wet thud echoed through the sudden silence of the deck, followed by the clatter of a few small items falling from the Brulk's belt. The entire section of plating seemed to shudder. The Brulk lay on his back, the air forced from his lungs in a pained whoosh. He stared at the ceiling, stunned. He tried to move his right arm. It twitched but would not obey. He tried to push himself up with his left, but a sharp, electric pain shot through his right knee where Jin's foot had brushed a specific point during the throw. His leg refused to lock. He was not pinned. He was not tied up, but he was utterly grounded. His own massive body had become a trap. Every time he tried to gather his limbs to rise, a jolt of confusing pain or a wave of numbness stopped him. He could only lie there and breathe, a low, ragged sound of fury and disbelief. Jin stood over him for only a second. His breathing was calm, his expression blank. He felt no excitement, no rush of victory. He felt only a cold check of the situation. The threat was neutralized. The primary objective was complete. His eyes left the bulk. He turned away as if the giant was now part of the scenery, a piece of fallen cargo. All of his focus shifted to the atrium archway, to the bed of green moss. Mina was pushing herself up on her elbows. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and shocked. The dark trickle of blood from her lip was now a smudge across her cheek. She looked from the groaning bulk on the floor to Jin, who was now walking towards her with the same quiet, purposeful steps he had used before. The silence in the commercial deck was absolute. The Gel traders had not moved. The Tauran security guard was finally starting to move forward, his heavy steps loud in the quiet, but he was moving slowly, carefully, his hand on his stunner but not drawing it. He was looking at Jin with a new, cautious assessment. Every other being was frozen. They had expected a splatter. They had expected the small human to be broken against a wall. They had not expected this. There had been no grand fight, no exchange of blows. There had been a swing, a miss, a touch, and a fall. It had taken less time than it took for a station announcement to cycle. It was not brutality. It was something else. It was efficiency. It looked less like combat and more like a gravity switch had been flipped on the bulk alone. Jin reached the moss bed. He stepped into the atrium, his shoes sinking slightly into the soft, damp green. He knelt beside Mina, his movements slow and non-threatening. "Don't try to get up too fast," he said, his voice low and calm. It was the first time he had spoken since the incident began. The sound of his voice, so ordinary, seemed to break the last of the spell on the crowd. A murmur began to ripple outwards, a rising wave of shocked whispers and translated exclamations. Mina looked at him, her hand pressed to her throbbing cheek. Her eyes were filled with tears of pain and shock, but also a dawning understanding. He had not been angry. He had been methodical. "Jin?" she whispered. His name a question, he gave a small, slight nod. He was looking at her injury, assessing it. "The station medics are coming," he said, hearing the distant whine of a response cart. He did not look back at the bulk. The thing on the floor was no longer his concern. His concern was here in the green moss with a person who had been hurt. The 20 seconds were over. The world was now dealing with what came after. The whine of the medical cart grew louder, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. 2 station medics, a human and a slender, insectoid Vel, rushed towards the atrium with a floating stretcher. Their eyes took in the scene. A human woman in the moss, a human man kneeling beside her, and a massive bulk trader lying like a beached sea creature on the deck plating 20 feet away, still struggling weakly. The Tauran security guard, Gorv, finally reached the bulk first. He placed a heavy boot gently on the trader's chest, not to hurt him, but to prevent any sudden, thrashing movement. "Do not move," Gorv rumbled, his voice like stones grinding. He looked at the bulk's twitching limbs with professional curiosity. He had seen bulks break limbs in fights and keep going. He had never seen one simply shut down. His right arm and leg appear non-functional. Gorv reported into his wrist calm, neurological disruption. Non-lethal. Suspect precision nerve strike. He had been on the station a long time. He knew the look of things. The medics split up. The Vel skittered over to the bulk, its multifaceted eyes scanning, delicate tools extending from its arms to take readings. The human medic, a man named Ben, went to the atrium. Jin moved aside as Ben approached, giving the medic space but remaining close. Mina was sitting fully up now, her back against the low wall of the moss bed. Ben shone a small light in her eyes, then gently probed her cheek and jaw. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, his voice calm.
Mina.
"Mina Park," she said, wincing slightly.
Okej. Mina.
"You've taken a bad hit. Cheekbone is bruised, maybe a minor fracture. Your lip is cut. I don't think your jaw is broken, but we need to get you to medbay for a full scan. Concussion protocol." Ben spoke while pressing a small cold patch to her cheek. He glanced at Jean. "You were with her?" "No," Jean said quietly. "I was over there." He nodded towards his column. Ben followed his gaze, then looked back at the bulk on the floor, then at Jean. His eyebrows went up slightly. He had heard the commotion on the security channel. He gave a slow, understanding nod. "I see. Well, she shouldn't walk. We'll take her on the stretcher." As they helped Mina onto the floating stretcher, the crowd began to press closer, held back only by 2 more arriving security officers. Datapads were raised, recording the bulk being carefully rolled onto a reinforced stretcher of his own. His limbs still uncooperative. The recordings showed the clear sequence. The strike, the 20-second walk, the brief blur of motion. The fall. A station administrator, a tall, anxious-looking being with pale blue skin, arrived. She went directly to Gorv. "Report. Now." Gorv kept his boot lightly on the bulk's chest as the Vel medic administered a sedative. Bulk trader, unidentified, struck human civilian Mina Park without provocation. Witnessed by dozens. A second human civilian, male identified as Jean, intervened. Used close-quarters technique to disable and subdue the aggressor. Aggressor was neutralized in approximately 20 seconds. No weapons used. Minimal collateral damage. He gestured to a small, overturned decorative pot from the atrium. "That is it." The administrator, Lyra, looked from the bulk to Jean, who was now standing silently near the atrium archway, watching Mina's stretcher float away. He looked completely ordinary. He was not breathing hard. He showed no signs of injury or excitement. Did he use a tool? A device? Lyra asked, confused. Humans were not known for this. "No, ma'am," Gorv said, a note of respect in his gravelly voice. He used his hands and feet. He knew exactly where to hit. It was clinical. Lyra walked over to Jean. The crowd hushed, eager to hear. "You are Jean?" "Yes." "Can you explain what happened?" Jean looked at her. His face was still calm, but his eyes were serious. "He hit her. He was going to leave. I stopped him." "Yes, but how?"
Lyra pressed.
"How did you do that?" She waved a hand towards the bulk stretcher now being loaded onto the medical cart. Jean was silent for a moment. He seemed to be searching for simple words. He was big. He was off balance. I used his balance against him. I touched the places that would make his arm and leg stop working for a while. He spoke as if explaining how to fix a broken switch. "It is a thing some humans learn. To protect ourselves." "A thing you learn," Lyra repeated. The concept seemed to settle in the air between them. It wasn't magic. It wasn't superhuman strength. It was learned. It was knowledge turned into action. Before she could ask more, Gorv approached. "Ma'am, we need his statement, and we need to check the security feeds. It looks like clear defense of another, but procedure is procedure." Jean nodded. "I will give my statement." He looked towards the corridor where Mina had been taken. "Can someone tell me how she is later?" Lyra found herself nodding. "Of course. The medbay will update us." She watched as Gorv led Jean away, not with force, but with a guiding hand that was noticeably careful. The young man went quietly. Lyra turned to look at the atrium. The vibrant green moss was trampled in one spot where Mina had fallen. A single, shallow imprint from a human shoe was visible where Jean had knelt. The rest was perfect, thriving, a calm pool of green in the sterile metal deck. She looked at the crowd. Dozens of eyes looked back, wide with a new kind of curiosity. They were not looking at a victim or a violent attacker anymore. They were looking at the space where something impossible had been made to look simple. The story was already changing, shifting from an act of violence to a demonstration of something unsettling and new. The lesson was not that humans were strong. The lesson was that humans had spent a very long time studying weakness. And they were very, very good at it. The security office was quiet, a sealed room away from the noise of the deck. Gorv sat across from Jean, a small recorder glowing on the table between them. The Tauren's large hands looked awkward holding a standard-issue datapad. For the record, state your full name and station assignment, Gorv said, his voice softer now. Jean Kong. I work in environmental systems, level 4. Air filtration maintenance. Jin's voice was even. He sat straight but not stiff, his hands resting on his knees. Gorv noted the job. It made sense. It was a job for someone patient, someone who understood how small things fit into a big system. Tell me what you saw, from the beginning, in your own words. Jean took a slow breath. He did not tell a story. He gave a report. I was standing by column D7 on the commercial deck. I saw the bulk trader, unidentified, moving through the crowd. He was aggressive. He approached the Terran Moss atrium where Mina Park was working. She asked him to step around her equipment. He struck her in the face with an open hand. She fell into the moss bed. He turned to leave. And what did you do? I assessed that he was an active threat. He had shown willingness to cause serious injury without reason. He was leaving the scene. Station security was not in immediate range. I moved to intervene. Why? Gorv asked. It wasn't an accusation. He seemed to genuinely want to know. Jean looked at him. Because she was hurt. Because he would have done it again to someone else. It was wrong. Gorv nodded slowly. Okay. Then describe your intervention. I approached from his side. He saw me. He swung his right arm. I avoided the swing and moved inside his reach. I struck a specific point near his right shoulder to disable the arm's motor control. He attempted a second swing with his left arm. I used his forward momentum and his unbalanced posture to execute a hip throw. He fell. During the throw, my foot made contact with a nerve cluster on his right knee to prevent immediate retaliation. He was then on the ground, unable to rise effectively. I then went to aid Mina Park. Gorv had stopped typing. He was just listening. The description was so dry, so clean. There was no I fought him or I attacked him. It was I disabled. I executed a throw. It was the language of a manual. Where did you learn to do this? Gorv finally asked. From my grandfather, and in a dojang, a training hall on Earth. For many years. What is it called? Hapkido. It is a study of movement, of balance, of using an opponent's force against them. It is for defense. For defense, Gorv repeated. He thought of the Brulk's wild, powerful swings. It did not look like you were just defending. It looked like you took him apart. Jean shook his head once. No. Defense is not just blocking. The best defense is to stop the threat. Quickly. Without getting hurt. So it does not continue. He chose to swing. I chose where and how he would fall. Gorv leaned back. He had seen the security footage already. It matched Jin's description exactly. There was no anger in the young man's movements. There was only purpose. It was perhaps the most professional takedown he had ever seen on the station, and it had been done by a species everyone considered physically inferior. The bulk systems are already recovering, Gorv said. The Vel medic says full mobility will return in a few hours. No permanent damage. You knew that would happen? Yes. The strikes are for temporary disablement. Not for breaking. Gorv was silent for a long moment. Jean Kong, you are not in trouble. The footage is clear. Every witness statement confirms it. You acted in defense of another. The Brulk will be detained, fined heavily, and likely deported. But people are talking. A lot. Jean waited. They are not used to seeing something like that from a human. It has caused a stir. The station administration may want to talk to you more. Diplomats might have questions. Gorv sounded almost apologetic. I understand, Jean said. I just want to know if Mina is okay. Gorv checked his pad. Medbay update. Minor facial fracture, moderate concussion. She will be sore, but she will recover fully. She is resting. He looked up. She asked about you. Wanted to know if you were in trouble. A flicker of emotion passed over Jin's face for the first time. A faint softening of concern. Can I see her? Soon. After we finish here. Gorv turned off the recorder. The formal part is done. Off the record. That was impressive work. I have never seen a bulk dropped like that. It was quiet. Jin nodded slightly, a small acknowledgement. Thank you. What if he had been faster? Gorv asked, curiosity getting the better of him. Then I would have tried something else, Jin said simply. There is always a balance. He was heavy, so he was slow to change direction. I am lighter, so I must be precise. It is just balance. Gorv thought about the word. Balance. Not strength, not violence. Balance. It was a new way to think about a fight. He stood up, the chair groaning under his weight. Come on. I will take you to Medbay myself. And Jean, you should be prepared. When you walk out there, people are going to look at you differently. Jean stood as well. He looked at the door, thinking of the crowded deck beyond. He hadn't thought about that. He had only thought about stopping what was wrong. The looking, the talking that came after. That was a different problem, one he didn't know how to solve. The walk from the security office to the medbay was not long, but it felt like a journey through a different station. Gorv walked beside Jean, a silent, hulking escort. Word had spread, faster than any official announcement, as they moved through the corridors. Beings of various species did not just glance at Jean. They stopped. They stared. Conversations paused. It was not a hostile stare, but one of deep, unsettled curiosity. They looked at his hands, his ordinary frame, as if trying to see the hidden machinery inside. At a group of Gel traders, the same ones from the deck, stood clustered near a food vendor. As Jean passed, one of them raised a slender, four-fingered hand in a gesture that was not quite a wave, but an acknowledgement. Their clicking speech was hushed. A Vel medic, different from the one on the deck, skittered past. Its multifaceted eyes tracked Jean for a full 3 seconds, a long time for its kind, before it hurried on. Gorv grunted softly. See what I mean? You are news. Jean kept his eyes forward. He felt exposed. In the dojang, the practice was private. The goal was self-control, not performance. This public dissection was worse than the confrontation. He just wanted to see if Mina was all right, and then go back to the quiet hum of the air filtration levels. They reached the medbay doors, which slid open with a sigh. The bright, clean light and the smell of antiseptic were a shock after the dimmer corridors. The head nurse, a no-nonsense woman named Sumi, looked up from her station. Her eyes widened in recognition. Gorv, and you must be Jean. She stood up. She's in Bay 3, resting. Doctor says no stress. Okay? She's had a shock. Understood. Jean said. Sumi led them past several closed curtains to a small, quiet bay. The curtain was partly open. Mina was sitting up in the bed, a blanket over her legs. The right side of her face was swollen and discolored, a dark purple bruise blooming from her cheekbone to her jaw. A clear medical patch was on her lip. She looked small and tired, but her eyes were clear. When she saw Jean, her face lit up for a second. Then she winced at the movement. Jean, you came. Sumi and Gorv hung back near the doorway, giving them space but staying within earshot. Jean stepped closer. He stopped a few feet from the bed, unsure of what to do. Are you in pain? He asked. They gave me something for it, Mina said. Her voice was a little thick. It's okay. They said it will heal. She looked at him, her gaze searching. Are you okay? They didn't arrest you? No. It was defense. They confirmed it. Mina let out a breath she seemed to have been holding. Good. That's good. She looked down at her hands, picking at the edge of the blanket. I saw it, you know. Not all of it, it was blurry. But I saw him fall. I heard the sound. She looked up again. How? How did you do that? He was so big. Jean gave the same answer he gave Gorv. He was off balance. I used his size against him. It is something I was taught.
Taugt, mina repeted softly.
She thought about the gentle, careful work of growing things. She understood teaching. They said you were like a machine. Precise. They said you weren't even angry. I was not angry, Jean agreed. Anger is shaky. It makes you miss things. Mina nodded slowly, understanding. Thank you. For stopping him. For helping me. Jean gave a small, awkward bow of his head. You are welcome. From the doorway, Sumi's comm pad chimed. She looked at it and sighed. Jean? Station administration is asking for you. Lyra, the director. She's in her office. She wants to talk now. Gorv shifted his weight. He just got here. Can it wait? Sumi showed him the pad. It's marked, Immediate Diplomatic Consult. It's not a request. The words hung in the sterile air. Diplomatic. It wasn't about security anymore. It was about what Jean represented. Jean looked back at Mina. I should go. Of course, she said, offering a small, pained smile. Go. Don't get in trouble because of me. As Jean turned to leave with Gorv, Mina spoke again, her voice firmer. Jean. He stopped. Whatever they ask you, just tell them the truth. Like you told me, it's just something we learn. Jean held her gaze for a moment and nodded. He followed Gorv out, the eyes of the medbay staff following him. The walk to administration was even quieter. The stares were more intense. News traveled fast in a closed system. Jean was no longer just a worker. He was an event. He was a question mark about his entire species. Lyra's office was a wide room with a large viewport showing the stars. She was not alone. A human man in the neat, formal suit of a diplomatic attaché stood by her desk. He looked tense. Jean Kong, Lyra said, gesturing for him to sit. This is Attaché Choi from the Earth Consortium office. He has some questions, given the wider implications. Attaché Choi gave a tight smile. Son, what in the world did you do? Jean sat. He felt very tired. I stopped an assault. Yes, but the method. Choi pressed, leaning forward. The footage is everywhere. Non-human stations, diplomatic channels. They're calling it a systematic anatomical takedown. They're asking if all humans are trained in this hapkido. They're concerned. Jean looked at the attaché, then at Lyra. Not all humans. Some. It is for self-defense. That is all. But it looks, Lyra said gently, like a hidden capability. It makes some species nervous. They thought they understood human limits. Now they are not sure. Jean was silent. He understood the problem, but he did not know the solution. He had not meant to make anyone nervous. He had meant to stop a hurt. Attaché Choi sighed, running a hand through his hair. The Brulk delegation is already screaming about excessive force, but their own laws support defense of other, so that's a dead issue. The real issue is the perception. We have spent years building an image as peaceful, cooperative, harmless traders. This complicates that. Being harmless, Jean said quietly, the words coming out before he could stop them, is not the same as being helpless. The room went very still. Lyra and Attaché Choi looked at him. Gorv, standing by the door, made a small sound that might have been a chuckle. Attaché Choi's tense expression softened, just a fraction. He leaned back in his chair. No, he said finally. No, I suppose it is not. He looked at Lyra. We will have to manage this. Issue a statement. Frame it as specialized training, not a general threat. He looked back at Jean. You, son, are going to have a very quiet few weeks. Stay out of the spotlight. Let this settle. Jean nodded. That sounded like a very good plan. As he was dismissed and walked back out into the corridor with Gorv, the stairs felt heavier. But now, mixed with the curiosity, he saw something else. In the eyes of a smaller, rodent-like species often pushed around by larger traders, he saw a flicker of something that looked like hope. Not hope for a fight, but hope that the biggest bully in the room was not always the one who decided what happened. The ripple was spreading. He had just wanted to help one person. But in doing so, he had reminded the entire station of a simple, forgotten truth. Size is not the only thing that matters. Sometimes, precision is heavier than weight. A week passed. The station's news cycle, always hungry, moved on to a shipment delay and a dispute between two mining guilds. But on the commercial deck, in the quieter moments, the memory lingered. It was in the way certain traders now gave the Terran Moss atrium a wider berth. It was in the slight pause a rowdy patron might make before causing a scene. The air had changed, just a little. Mina was back at work. The bruise on her face had faded to a yellowish-green shadow. She moved a bit more slowly, but her hands were just as careful with the moss. The trampled spot had been repaired, new shoots encouraged to grow. Life went on. Jean had taken Attaché Choi's advice. He kept to the lower levels, to the hum of the air filtration systems. The work was good. It was simple, logical, and quiet. But he could not stay down there forever. He needed to go to the commissary. He needed to walk the corridors. When he did, the stairs were less intense, but they were still there. They had softened from shock into something more thoughtful. A few humans on the station had tried to talk to him, their voices full of excited questions. He answered politely and briefly, and they soon left him alone. Today, he felt a need to see the atrium. Not to be seen, but just to see it whole again. He took a service lift up and stepped out onto the less busy eastern edge of the commercial deck. He walked, head down, towards the patch of green that he saw Mina first. She was on her knees, carefully trimming the edge of the moss bed. A small, curious crowd was gathered at a respectful distance. Not a threatening crowd, but a watching one. At the front of the group stood a young being Jean did not recognize. It was short, with fine blue fur and large, dark eyes. A species often preyed upon by larger bullies on the station. The young being took a hesitant step forward, then another. It stopped at the very edge of the atrium's archway, looking at Mina, then at the moss, then back at Mina. It seemed to gather its courage. Mina looked up and saw it. She sat back on her heels and smiled, a gentle expression that made her bruised face look kind. "Hello?" she said. The being flinched, but held its ground. It raised a small, three-fingered hand. It did not wave. Instead, it bent its knees slightly and bowed its head, holding its hands in a strange, careful way by its sides. It was an awkward, clearly unpracticed movement. But its meaning was unmistakable. It was trying to copy a bow. Jin's bow. Mina's smile softened. She understood. She gave a small, gracious nod of her head in return. "It's very peaceful here, isn't it?" she said, touching the moss. "You can come closer if you like. It won't bite." The being stared, then took one more tiny step forward, its large eyes wide with wonder at the green living thing. Jean watched from the shadow of his column. He felt a tightness in his chest he hadn't known was there begin to loosen. This was not fear. This was not about being a weapon or a threat. This was about respect. The young being was not afraid of the moss or of Mina. It was showing respect for the space, for what had happened there. For the idea that sometimes the small could be safe. He saw Gorv then, making his rounds. The Tauren guard paused near the atrium, watching the scene. He did not shoo the crowd. He just stood, a silent, solid presence ensuring the peace was kept. His eyes scanned the deck and found Jean in the shadows. Gorv did not approach. He simply raised a heavy hand and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a nod between professionals. An acknowledgement. Jean returned the nod. He looked back at Mina and the young being. The being was now pointing at different parts of the moss, making soft, questioning sounds. Mina was answering, her voice a gentle murmur. This was the new normal. It was not about humans becoming warlords. It was about a shift in balance. The station had learned that humans were not helpless. They were precise. They were controlled. And because of that, they could afford to be gentle. True gentleness, Mina had shown him, requires the capacity to be otherwise. Otherwise, it is just weakness. The lesson had been learned. Strike an Earthborn girl, and you do not strike her fragility. You strike the calm, collected resolve of a species that learned to turn momentum against itself long before it reached the stars. And in doing so, you remind everyone that there are many kinds of strength. Brute force is one. Patience is another. Precision is another. And sometimes, the simple act of tending to a patch of green moss in a metal world is the strongest statement of all. Gene turned and walked away, back towards the service lift. The deck's noise washed over him again, but it felt different now. He was part of it, but he was not trapped by it. He had done what was needed. Nothing more, nothing less. He could go back to his work, to the quiet hum of the machines, knowing that the garden upstairs was safe, and that a small, blue-furred being had just learned that it was okay to be curious, to be small, and to bow to things it did not yet understand. The story was over. Life, however, continued, and it was, for the first time in a while, simply okay.